Okay, so dedication. I'm going to dedicate this to ongoing efforts of our soldiers to be victorious in their mission in destroying the enemy completely and returning safely and returning the hostages safely. I've just got some names, Hebrew names of friends of mine's kids who are in the army. So we've got Amiram Ben Ronit, who's actually a student of mine, Amiram, a couple of a very nice kid. Now he's in the army. And we've got Yonatan Yehuda Ben Meirav and all the other soldiers. Any names, Damon? What about your nephew? What's his Hebrew name?
Gabriel
Hebrew name and mother's name.
Gabriel Tzvi ben Ilan for Ilana. You use both for the funny enough for the soldiers. Rabbi
Yeah.
taught me that. And then obviously Pam and Israel Goldberg's son Shmuel David ben for Israel, and obviously all the soldiers and everybody in close.
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay, so just an idea in this week's parsha, with the parsha that past parsha, which we finished off today at Mincha time, and the previous week was Chaya Sarah, and one of the main stories was about Avram trying to find a wife for Yitzchak, and he tasked Eliezer with that function, and they were waiting at a well, and they said, if a young lady comes and shows chesed and doesn't just offer us water, but offers our animals water and shows kindness to animals, then this is someone with great midot. And that's exactly what happened. And so one of the main things, she showed chesed and kindness, and they said this is the one. And eventually the rest is, they say the rest is history. She married, she accepted him as a husband, which she had to. You can't be forced, like certain religions force their daughters to marry someone. And in Jewish law, the woman, you can't force it on a woman. She has to accept it, which she did. And that's it. So they lived their lives, I don't want to say happily ever after because they had challenges, but that's so simple midot like kindness, chesed, is very important in a person, male and female. Those are the traits that we have to admire. Not that someone is has like $5 billion in the bank like Bezos and Steve Jobs. That's very nice, but that doesn't make people like that nice people or good people in the big scheme of things.
Okay, let's go to the Mishnah and Gemara, guys. Thanks, Kev. It's important. Midas are the focal point. I agree. So I'm sharing the Mishnah. Arthur read it on Thursday just for the squits of keeping him safe in Eretz Israel, please God. So just because the Gemara is going to lead on from there, I don't expect you to have the memory from Thursday. So I'll just read it as follows. If custom or tax collectors confiscate someone's donkey and give him another donkey, or if bandits confiscate his donkey and give him, his garment and give him another garment, they are his, because it may be assumed that the owners have despaired of retrieving. So what example we used is that there was a tax collector that's very punitive against the populace and has got permission from the king. However, he feels bad about somebody that he did a collection from. So example, we used it in modern terms, that the guy's got a Maserati and he confiscated it so that the tax collector gets to keep it, and he gives a paltry sum back to the king. And therefore it's considered as if in a certain sense it's stolen because he's being punitive and not going according to the king's rates, at which there's suspicion as to whether or not you can keep it if he gives you another item in return. So what he did in this particular case is the guy said, well, I've got nothing to ride around in. And in order to appease his guilt of stealing the Maserati, what he did is he gave him somebody else's Ford Escort as a compensatory car, just to lessen his guilt. Just use that as an example. But said in that case that the citizen who gets the lesser item of a similar item, they are his, which is a bit contradictory because we did learn in a previous Mishnah that according to Rashi, it's repugnant for him to keep it because he can suspect that the tax collector's collection is of ill repute and certainly stolen, especially since most tax collectors are corrupt. And although they're working an agency from the king, the amount the king gets compared to the taxes that are levied, the discrepancy between the ratios of what should be collected, like, for example, staple goods have got a lower tax ratio and they're there to ease the population, are not taken into account. If somebody that favors their friend charges a low tax than a stranger or somebody they dislike, these are all issues where they technically lose the agency of the government or the kingship, and as they're not keeping to the rules and regulation. We used an example as if you're selling Mercedes Benzes and you're selling generic parts, you could lose the agency, and therefore the warranties if you buy parts from a agency that is not adhering to the corporate governance. Okay, so we're saying in this case it's a little bizarre that the citizen is able to keep a lesser car when we know that it's been given to him, and certainly it's not 100% legitimate. So we're saying, what's the reason that this particular Mishnah is different to the previous? And the Mishnah carries on and it says, because it can be assumed that the owners have despaired of retrieving them, namely because it's not just a tax collector, but or a custom collector, but he's got authority of the king, and therefore nobody's going to toy the king. And when the tax collector comes, he's coming with 10 henchmen that are going to crease your skull with a bat if you don't comply. So it's always a wonderful way to convince you to hand over your car keys and to probably despair of getting them back. So Yush, despair, is a prerequisite of ownership. Okay, so let's just carry on with the Mishnah before we hit the Gemara. In the case of one who rescues things from a river or from a troop, we generally know of a troop of baboons like the ANC, but in this case it's a troop, meaning a troop of thieves, okay, or bandits, same thing, the ANC. And if it is known that the owners have despaired of retrieving them, they are his. And again, the same concept is that in the case of an item that's rescued, you know that if it's going into the hands and it's rescued by somebody that's illegitimate, you can pretty much guarantee you're not going to get it back. And it says here in the Mishnah, similarly, should one find a swarm of bees, it is known that the owner has despaired of retrieving them, they are his. In other words, if the bees that are used to produce honey go to an adjoining farm, it's very unlikely to get the bees back. Then the owner of the new farm, unless he's got evidence as to whose bees they were, can assume that they're now his. So that's the opinion of the Tana Kamma. Rav Yochanan ben Baroka said a woman or man is believed to say the swarm emerged from here. So we said this isn't quite the most politically correct part, because when you say a woman is not allowed to give testimony, we know in law generally a minor's testimony is problematic on a different issue. In other words, by the way, in secular law, minor, all women can give witness testimony, even a minor if he witnesses a homicide, etc. But where the issue comes with a minor is a minor without parental consent cannot join the army, for example, cannot own a firearm. There's certain decisions a minor cannot make without a parental or guardian authorship. So we're saying a woman is similar in the Gemara in that she cannot provide testimony. And it's not that she doesn't have authority, but it means that she could be, in the Gemara, emotionally swayed. And I don't want to certainly get into it because I need to be hung for a statement like a hole in the head, okay? So just go with it, guys. So a woman or minor is believed that a swarm emerged from here. So what it's saying is, although a minor's testimony is generally not accepted, why? Because we said a minor cannot sometimes fathom consequence of decision, etc., and a woman gets emotionally involved, they are generally barred from official testimony or being or aiders witnessing. But this is a different thing, because this is not official testimony. This is a comment that what happened is they saw the original farmers' bees go from point A to B, and therefore they were just saying in conversation, oh, these are Reuven's bees, and they've gone to Shimon's farm. And therefore, or that you see the farmer Reuven run to Shimon's farm and say, those are my bees, etc. So it's evidential that the incident comes to bring a fact that there was a witness as to the event of where the bees migrated from. All right. And then it goes on, the Mishnah, and says, one may walk in the midst of his fellow's field to save his swarm of bees. But if he thereby damages the field, he must pay for what he damaged. However, so that's obvious. If you walk in somebody's private property and you damage somebody's private property, you have to make compensation. However, there cannot be a premeditative damage. So according to the Bava Kamma, he may not cut off a branch of his fellow's tree with intent to pay compensation. In other words, he's saying that the Bava Kamma, which is the general rabbinic opinion, that you can't premeditatively see all the bees settled and build a hive in a particular tree. You cut off that branch in order to rescue the hive. If you happen to damage without previous intent, it's okay. But Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, does not agree with the Bava Kamma or the general rabbinic opinion, because Rav Yishmael says something different. He says, look, you actually can cut off a branch of his fellow's tree and then pay compensation. Meaning is that there's a lot at stake here financially. So even if you damage the branch in order to give the owner back what that branch is worth, you can, because there's a lot of money outstanding with regards to your collection of bees and your honey farm. But that generally doesn't go with the Bava Kamma or general rabbinic opinion. So that's the Mishnah as it stands. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I hope I've added some explanation.
Damon, it went into so many different issues. It was Yayosh and compensation and one or two other things. It didn't just discuss one issue there.
Yeah, it went into a myriad of issues, and that's exactly the point of the Gemara here. Is it's going to break down the various issues because there's a lot to unpack. And Kevin's right. This particular Mishnah was full. Often we have Mishnayos in Bava Kamma that deal with one or two issues, or they hone in on one issue, and this is dealing with a myriad of issues. However, something should be abundantly clear to you guys. On the 114th daf, you're going to see there's a lot of revision that occurs from the 66th daf. And I don't know about you, but even though I'm giving the share, I could do with the revision. And that's why I welcome you guys to listen to Rabbi Cohen, who's got I've got all of his shirim, that when you get a chance, if ever you want to do Chazorah, his new Bava Kamma, which aligns with the current Daf Yomi, is incredible. Arthur would enjoy it very, very much.
Is he on Spotify or is he on a podcast forum that he uploads it to?
I'm not sure, but what I did do is that if you want it in the Bava Kamma group and you want the shirim, because my WhatsApp is filling up, what I'd suggest you do is I post them, you download it, you keep it in the folder, and on a rainy day, go through it, because I know you guys are busy. So what I'm going to do, because I've got a lot of learning to do, I don't just prepare the shir for you. I do a lot of my own learning too. Thank God I was able to cover this particular daf. Took me about 15 minutes. And thank God I remembered most of it already. So I'm very lucky in that regard. Very lucky. So you guys at your leisure, you can do it in the December holidays. All right, guys, let's go through the Gemara. Is that there is a brisa that contradicts the Mishnah's first ruling. Okay. Now, just to give you a bit of an indicator, is that if you have a look, the brisa is basically saying, if the citizen took a donkey from the custom collector, he must return it to the original owner. So let me just give you the case in the Mishnah. If a custom collector confiscated somebody's donkey and gave him another donkey, they're his, because it can be assumed that the original owners despaired of retrieving them. So the concept of the Mishnah is as follows. It's saying, look, Guys, I don't know anything about donkeys. I don't know anything about animal husbandry. All I know is that guy's got a Porsche. The tax collector takes it away from him. Guy says, I don't have a car. He figures he's going to give the guy a Ford Escort. But that Ford Escort that he's giving him, you can be sure, was confiscated from another citizen in the community. And it's saying in this particular case that the citizen can keep the lower level car because otherwise he's going to land up with no car, because it can be assumed that the owner of the Ford Escort has despaired of ever having retrieved his Ford Escort because he's dealing with tax collectors, which have the authority of the king and the moral compunction of a mafia collector. So we're saying that this is contradicting to a brisa, because the brisa that we learned, and by the way, we even learned this before in the previous Mishnah, that he must return the Ford Escort to the original owner within the community. Okay. And why? I mean, you can, it's not only about, we're gonna discuss the difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. So here it's saying, the Mishnah is saying the letter of the law is there was Yush, there's despair on the part of the owner, and therefore there's a transfer of ownership providing this Yush. The different criteria, which we'll go through in the 66 stuff, even though it's 114th, there's going to be repeated concepts. Just one thing, Kev, Rashi said the reason you don't keep it is morally it's repugnant to do so, if you remember from the previous Mishnah. You're going to ask something?
Why was this tax collector, why did he take away the donkey in the first place? What was it? Was he corrupt, or was the owner of the donkey, did he have a tax liability? What, or was it an ANC type story there?
So it's a very interesting thing, is that what we learn is the kingdom of the law is the law. We learned this before, and what this basically meant is, surely if you've got a parliamentary system, you've got a judicial system, you've got a legislature system, and you've got a policing force, and you've got the tax force. What do we mean is that every country, not South Africa, a normal country, we've never lived in one, but in an assuming northern hemisphere country, even like Israel, is you pay taxes and you get infrastructure. So in a country where the tax is run on a legitimate basis, in that it contributes to infrastructure, and it's involved with the legislative and judicial system, and it sets up courts of law, which is a Noahide commandment incumbent upon all people, is in that particular case, you have to contribute taxes, even against your will, because no one likes paying taxes, but there has to be a system of law and governance. However, what we learned in our last Mishnah is that the general consensus is Jewish tax collectors, as well as idolaters, can be considered corrupt, because the king cannot monitor all tax collection, particularly if there's a war. The army is not used in tax collection. It's used in border control, incursions into other countries, wealth creation, because wealth is created by war, because you take over other countries' assets, etc. So there's not enough infrastructure to man collection. So there were private security firms in those days that used to collect taxes on behalf of the king, and we learned that the tax collector had to pay the king an annual stipend, regardless of whether he collected the aforementioned tax for the year or not. But the reason why most tax collectors were not considered honest is because, firstly, the tax was not regulated correctly. In other words, they collected an exorbitant amount compared to what the king got. There was no proper governance in terms of tax ratios of earnings. There was a lot of misery regarding the collection. So, Kevin, what can be assumed is that, yes, tax is owed, but unless the country is run legitimately, you can assume that most of the money would be stolen. If you were absolutely sure all the money is stolen, we learned in the previous Mishnah, you cannot use the tax collector's box to take larger denominations and take change, even if you had to pay lower tax. So in other words, you had a 200 zuz, you had to pay 100 zuz worth of taxes, and you knew all the money was stolen, you couldn't even get your change. If you suspected some of the money being stolen, but you weren't sure exactly what, you could get your change because you could suffer a loss. According to Rashi, it was morally repugnant to use it as a, just hang on one sec, Kev, as a way to break up your denominations into smaller, unless you had to get change for the tax you were paying. What did you want to ask?
Because you're taking from stolen money, effectively. Even though you're not stealing from it, you're actually benefiting from money that was stolen.
Correct.
It's not clean money.
Correct. That's what the Bryce is saying. It's saying that if you get something from a custom collector, you've got to return it to the original owner. So then we got to understand the Bava Kamma's ruling in our Mishnah, which is the rabbinic opinion. So obviously here, there's an issue, because according to the Bava Kamma of our Mishnah, he holds that to spare Yush alone. Look, let me just give you an example. In the Brisa, the reason why you have to return it to the original owner is because despair alone does not affect acquisition, and therefore the recipient of the donkey doesn't acquire it since it initially came into his possession illegally. So in other words, what I'm saying, just guys, hang on for me 1 second. I just want to pause this here. All right, so guys, let's just go back. So we want to know why the Brisa says that if the tax collector gave him an inferior object equivalent to what he gave, in other words, he gave a Maserati, got back a Ford Escort, why must you return it to the original owner? There's got to be a legal reason. We're not talking the moral reason. The Gemara is also interested in the legal reason. And the Mishnah holds something different, obviously, that he can keep it. So the Gemara explains the Tana is saying that the Tana's ruling of the Brisa holds that despair alone does not affect acquisition, and thus the recipient of the donkey does not acquire it, since it initially came into his possession illegally. So the Brisa is saying that the citizen has to return the inferior donkey that he got from the tax collector in return for a greater donkey, because it never became the tax collector's. It came into his possession illegally. Why? Because according to the Brisa, even if the owner of the donkey despaired of retrieving it while it was still in his possession of the tax collector, they didn't acquire it. Because why didn't the tax collector acquire it? Because Yush alone, which is despair, without a physical change or change of domain or without payment, doesn't affect acquisition. The fact of despair alone is not enough. It has to have and how do we know this? Because we say if a robber stole an ox and he slaughtered it or sold it, there's a 4 or 5-fold payment. There's a 5-fold payment. And he acquires it and he has to give the cash equivalent. Why? If you slaughter an animal, there's a physical change to the animal. So it's the Yush that the original owner has in terms of despair, and that despair is enforced when he's never going to get Betsy the cow back to do work on his farm because Betsy's stake. So that physical change, along with despair, acquires the animal for the robber, and he has to pay the financial equivalent. Okay.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sorry to stop the flow.
One thing. Let me just finish one thing. Is that it also occurs that when a robber steals an ox and sells it, only at that point is the 5-fold payment triggered, as well as slaughtering it, because the payment that he receives from the buyer triggers the change of ownership, which that's what incurs the penalty, not just the slaughtering, it's also the selling. So it's got to be Yush with either payment, physical change, or change of domain. Gav, what did you need to know?
No, so I understand all of that. My question's just a very simple question. How's the guy who's getting this Ford Escort or donkey, whatever, from the taxpayer, from the tax collector, how does he know it's stolen? How does he know it's stolen?
Okay, well, you can know it's stolen from a very simple reason. And then I need to go back to finishing the point, is that did he want to give over his Maserati to the tax collector? Yes or no, Gavin?
No, he didn't, but taxpayer might have given him something that was legal, though.
No. Hang on a second. Hang on. Let's break it down into a step-by-step process. Did he want to give his Maserati that he worked so hard for? No,
absolutely.
So was it taken against his will, yes or no?
That was taken against his will.
Yes, fine. So if it was taken against his will, and then you can be sure that it was stolen. Anything that's taken against your will and you don't get equitable payment for what you deem it's worth is either a transaction that doesn't take place because the buyer and seller don't come to an agreement, or if it's taken against your will, or you're made to sign a document with coercion, it's theft. So if it
I
happened to
understand.
him, no, hang on. If it happened to him, you can rest assured it happened to everybody else that had to get their car at his hands. That's the default position.
Yeah,
of the
so you're
Gemara.
making a presumption like that. I don't know if that's right. I'm just
No,
saying
that's
that's
an
what.
absolute right according to the Gemara, because the Gemara is saying.
Okay. If the Gemara says that as well, it's fine. I give up.
No. You don't have to give up.
No.
I want you to kick back. Kevin, just hold your question for 1 second.
No, I tried. I don't know. No, I get you. Okay, so you're making that presumption. Okay, I realize that's probably what you're doing. So if you're making that presumption,
that presumption is not my presumption. That presumption is, why would you give up an asset you worked hard for unless it was by force, and if you got no payment for it? Because it was by force. Therefore, if this guy's going around to different citizens collecting things by force, then the definition of stealing it is having something taken against your will.
No,
and if
no,
you
but
don't
you
get
see, I
payment,
was
it's
thinking,
against your will.
but I was thinking it's possibly maybe the taxpayer's own Ford that belongs to him. That he just wants to take the Maserati from us, and then give him his stupid old, second-hand Ford. That could be the
Anybody
case.
that does this for a living does not have an inferior car. If he takes from
it's a good
thousands
point.
of citizens, he's not driving a beaten up inferior car. Believe it.
Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, what's your question?
Why
Right, so, yeah, I
why
wasn't
would the
there on
guy
that.
even
Thank
accept
you.
the escort if the value is not even close to what the Maserati? Why would he
Because
even?
he's going to get his skull
That's
cracked open by the
oh,
thugs
was
that
it
work
say
for the
he was
tax
forced? It was like
collector.
under duress.
So
It's
he
like
was very happy
under
to
duress
get any
mainly.
car in return for
Under
keeping
duress, he was forced to take the escort.
Absolutely, otherwise he wouldn't have given up his Maserati.
Okay, yeah,
It's just like he's got a car to get from A to B. And why did the tax collector give him a car? To ease guilt. We often have some mafia figures that give a lot of money to the church, etc., to ease their guilt. The Gemara used the example from the Meiri, who said that people want to whitewash their sins by doing a mitzvah to make it seem as though if they steal 1 million and they give 10,000 to tzedakah, then suddenly they feel like they're tzaddik. Okay, so let's just compare this brisa to the Mishnah, and it clearly says that in the case of the Mishnah, it's saying that Yeush, despair alone, is enough to effect acquisition for the tax collector, and therefore, when the other party gets the Ford Escort, it belongs to the tax collector, as Gavin said. But according to the Bryce and many other opinions, Yeush alone doesn't effect acquisition. It has to be acquisition in conjunction with either a change of ownership, okay, or with regard to a change of domain, okay, or a transactional fee that's returned in conjunction with the despair, because Yeush alone is not sufficient. And we know this from the robber, and we also know this from the thief, who said that if he steals an animal and he slaughters or sells it, the selling is a transaction of money as well as despair from the original owner. And the physical change in terms of slaughtering the object is enough for a physical change combined with despair, as well as a change of domain, which goes from the original owner to the new buyer. Those things in conjunction with each other are factors that, with Yeush, makes a change of ownership. It doesn't mean the robber can keep it. It just means that he has to pay the cash equivalent. It's no longer in the jurisdiction of the original owner. That's all it's saying. So that's what we're saying, is it clearly means that the Mishnah, whoever the Tana Kamma of the Mishnah is, which is a general rabbinic opinion, it holds that Yeush alone suffices. Whereas in the Bryce, it's saying that Yeush doesn't suffice unless it's unless it's combined with either a physical change, transactional equivalent of a buy and sell, or alternatively a change of physical domain. So, in fact, this Tana holds that even Yeush together with a change of domain doesn't affect acquisition, because it's evident from the ruling that the third party doesn't acquire the donkey although it's been transferred from the robber's domain to his. In other words, he gave him the Ford Escort, this other citizen. So the Gemara says Yeush alone. Why? Because it wishes to give the underlying reason for the Tana's opinion. Namely, that since Yeush alone doesn't affect acquisition, the stolen property is still the owner's when it enters the domain of the third party. And having entered his possession illegally, it can't become his property as a result of that transfer. And the Rashash said he has to return it. Okay, that's the bottom line. There's a different explanation of the Brisa, and others say that the Brisa should be understood as follows: is that if after receiving the donkey he wishes to return it, he's got to return it to the original owner. And according to that explanation, the recipient isn't obligated to return the donkey. What's the reason? The Tana holds that despair alone does affect acquisition, even according to the Brisa, because the opinion is that the custom collectors themselves acquired the donkey through Yeush alone. And thus, when they transferred the donkey to the third party, it's permitted to the third party, and it didn't enter his domain illegally. So it's saying that the reason has to be something else, according to the other opinion. And that is out of piety, because even Rashi said, I don't want property that's not mine. It's repugnant to me, and he wishes to rid himself of it. He's got to give it to the original owner. Okay. Now, guys, we've got 4 minutes left. Let's end off on this note because we're going to get into issues of Tara and Tuma.
Okay.
It's going to get difficult.
So why has it brought up this whole issue about the tax collector? What's going to be the end, the main, what's the main point, the reason for it being brought up together with Yeush? And
excellent question, because we were going through different areas of robbery and thievery, and we're saying you've got illegal robbers and thieves, and you've got robbers and thieves that are politicians and tax collectors and have legitimacy of state, but they're still considered robbers and thieves because things, Gavin, are taken against their will. And it's not as if you're dealing with a country where you still pay taxes resentfully, but on some level, you know it's being used for communal infrastructure and the betterment of education, national health care, and retirement, looking after those that are no longer able to fend for themselves because they're frail, infirm, or retired, or they're no longer able to earn. So in that particular case, okay, you're not happy about the taxes, but you know it's for the greater good. It's a very different case in this particular situation where the tax levels are punitive and there's no infrastructural benefit or health benefit or looking after the aged or infirmed. So therefore, that's pure theft. That's what's happening in this country. Yeah. And I'm encouraging you on record to do everything in your power to give those taxes to tzedakah rather than pay, because it's a form of robbery and theft. And what is Bava Kamma about? Damages, robbery, theft, creditors, debtors, acquisitions, there's more in Bava Metzia, but liens on property, and debts to be repaid. It's aspects of civil law. All right, guys, I wish you a good week. I'll see you on Monday evening.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. That was excellent.
Cheers,
yeah.